Hello, and welcome to the 8th episode of Tech in Chicago. I'm Colin Keeley, and I interview Chicago's top founders and investors on this show. Today, I'm happy to welcome Jeff Carter to the podcast. Jeff is the founder of Hyde Park Angels, one of the most active angel groups in the U.S., and he's currently raising a VC fund at West Loop Ventures. We talk about a wide variety of topics, including how the Chicago tech scene has grown and changed in the last 20 years, what we have to do to keep growing, and why having pornographers and money launderers as early adopters of your product may actually be a good sign. I really enjoyed this interview, and I think you will too. Here's Jeff. We have Jeff Carter here today. Jeff, thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here on a beautiful snowy opening day for the White Sox. They deserve it.
So, Jeff, what are you up to now for the people that maybe haven't heard of you yet?
Well, I'm raising a fund with a guy named Kenny Estes. He was one of the first high-frequency traders with GetGo. Kenny is a double major in math and computer science. Traded successfully for 10 years, set up their London office, was the 15th employee there, and I think they had 1,500 employees when he left. I can't remember. So we're doing that, and it's just in the beginnings of going out and trying to raise money. So
is that West Loop Ventures?
That would be West Loop Ventures, yeah.
Let's talk about your background a little bit. Where did you grow up, and where did you start your career?
Okay. I grew up in the western suburbs of Chicago, and I wound up on the floor as a commodity trader. I traded my own money for 25 years. Never had any customers. I wasn't a hedge fund man. It was like managing your own hedge fund. It was all my money. I was on the board of directors at the Merck. I was one of the guys who really fought hard to change it from a non-profit to a for-profit, and to change it from sort of open outcry to an electronic trading platform, amidst a lot of other things that we had to do. And it was a brutally tough fight. We kind of started the fight in 1992, 3, 4-ish. It really started to get pitched in the later 90s. And it culminated with eventually becoming a non-for-profit, demutualized firm and doing an IPO in November of 2002. When I was on the board, I used to have lunch with Merton Miller, and he was a professor at the University of Chicago, and I said, I always wanted to do my MBA, and he said, well, if you do it at Chicago. And so I applied to Northwestern, got rejected because I was not, they told me, they said, we don't know what study group we're going to put you in. I wasn't corporate enough for them at all. And the Booth program, the executive program, really fit me. So I did that, and coming out of that, some classmates and I started Hyde Park Angels in April of 2007. We really started kind of putting it together in November of 2006. So, and then we started making investments, So
what motivated you to get started with that?
The real motivation came from the floor. So on the trading floor, we would see deal flow all the time. It was never any good. Nobody ever made any money. You never had a network to analyze it. The check size was always 50 or 100 or 200 grand. The guy that was raising the money would always take 6 or 12% extra for himself, and then also charge the entrepreneur a bunch of money. When you started doing the investigatory work of what the angel group and the angel situation was in Chicago at the time, there were people writing checks, but they were hard to find. They were hard to get meetings with. They drove hard bargains. The people that were brokers that were raising money were charging entrepreneurs an arm and a leg to do it. And the people that were writing checks weren't serving on boards. The people that were raising the money weren't serving on boards. And so it was like stupid. We saw the angel model in California. Vishal Verma was from Silicon Valley, and he kind of said, hey, we should do an angel group. And we looked at that and said, if we could partner with the University of Chicago, it'd be really cool. Steve Kaplan said, hey, we'd love for you to do an angel group. And Kathleen Swan was an attorney in town that did our paperwork. And, we just did it. And the interesting thing about it was we had a meeting, and all these sort of cognoscenti venture people from Chicago came to the meeting and thought we would totally fail. We weren't known quantities at all. The other thing that we kind of did it for was, there's the altruistic thing. We always thought Chicago should have a big startup community. New York had a growing one. Boston had a very good medical one. And of course, there's Silicon Valley. LA had, in 2007, a smaller community. And so we were like, why not Chicago? And University of Illinois has the best goddamn engineering school in the country. And all these people were down there creating these companies, and they'd come up to Chicago, couldn't get funding, so they'd go to the coast. Or the network was already established from Champaign to Silicon Valley. So they wouldn't even come to Chicago. They would just go to Silicon Valley because the network was already there. So we thought, hey, we could get a lot of talent from there. And then you look at schools like Wisconsin and Michigan State and Iowa and, the whole Big Ten, Purdue, Indiana. Not to mention the fact that Northwestern and Chicago are great schools too, right? And then you go into what they would call second-tier schools like DePaul. So Robin Chada at the time he runs the Junto Institute now, but he was running the Coleman Center of Entrepreneurship, and they were turning out some entrepreneurs. So there was enough pieces around, but there was nothing to bring them all together. And so that's one of the reasons HPA was successful, is it was kind of the first one that really did it in an organized way, that and they wrote checks. So I recruited the bulk of the first part of the angel group, the actual members, and I was very cognizant that I would recruit people that would write checks. A lot of original members are traders. Traders are used to taking risks. They're not afraid to lose money. They make quick decisions, and they're not afraid of writing checks. So a lot of these angel groups that are out there will chew on an entrepreneur like a dog does a bone until there's nothing left, or they'll take so long to make a decision that it dies on the vine, and that's not good for the entrepreneur. So we wanted to be really entrepreneur friendly, and we wanted to make sure that, hey, our interests were aligned with yours. So instead of charging you a bunch of money to pitch, charging you money to do the deal, putting our legal on your back, putting all these fees on your back, we pay extra. So if we raise $1 million for you, we pay an extra 5% now. It used to be 3%. That covers all the accounting and legal for the life of the deal. And all the money that gets raised goes to the entrepreneur in exchange for equity, usually preferred equity, but equity. And so our economic interests are aligned with the entrepreneurs rather than us trying to make money off the back of the entrepreneur. So we kind of changed the paradigm there, and we made some enemies in Chicago early because we put them out of business, and they didn't like that. And Chicago's always been a broker town. Who do you know? Everybody's got their hand out. It's a very transactional kind of place, and that's historical. You could read my friend Don Miller's book, City of the Century, and it started in 1830. But we kind of changed that, and I think the entrepreneurial community benefited. So we started in 2007. Accelerate Labs started, I think, in 2009. 1871 comes along in 2012. And now we're here at 2016, and we're the number 7 startup hub in the world. And it's not just because of us, but there's lots of people pulling on the rope. And I think last quarter we did $2.4 million in checks.
And how many deals is that?
I can't remember offhand. But I mean, we write checks and we do a lot of deals. So, and we follow on, and that's great. So we're one group, and there's other groups, and we help other groups get started. So I helped Irish Angels get figure out stuff, and they're doing great, and they're writing checks. Any group that wants to get started can come to Hyde Park Angels. We'll tell them how to do it. We'll show them how to do it. They can come to a meeting and see how we do it. And we want them to start. We want them to start in Chicago, because the more groups there are here, the better it is for us.
So, like, how many angels do you guys have now? And if someone wanted to join, how would they go about it?
How many do we have now? I don't know the exact number. I'm going to say between 106 and 115, but I don't know exactly. We set very base requirements when we started to keep the hurdles low. So you had to invest $250,000 in deals that we had over 5 years. Okay. So works out to, $50,000 a year. If you do it on a per deal basis, if you do 4 deals a year, it's about $17,500 a deal, right? You had to be an accredited investor because the IRS demands it. And it just makes it easier on the entrepreneurs. People that aren't accredited probably don't have the capacity to write checks like that. The other thing that we ask our members to do is use their network to help the entrepreneurs get talent, customer acquisition, teach them how to build a company, things like that. Because usually we're at the early stage, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. So they really have to build a company. So the idea is get them to Series A, get them to venture, and then whatever happens, happens. And most of our companies are raising next rounds of capital.
How are you guys finding these companies? Are they reaching out to you? Are you reaching out to them?
Yeah. So in the early days, it was hard. The deal flow wasn't very good, and you had to really beat the bushes. I can't tell you how many crappy meetings and crappy places in Chicago to try to find deal flow. As the community has gotten bigger and better, the deal flow has really improved to where now the deal flow in Chicago is really good. The thing that sets us apart, I think, from other ecosystems and the philosophy that we have is we invest in what Chicago's good at. So if in April of 2007 at our very first meeting, somebody asked us, are you going to be like Silicon Valley? And I said, no, we're not going to be like Silicon Valley. If I want to compete with Silicon Valley, I'm going to get my ass kicked. Why as an entrepreneur would I go to Chicago when I should be going to Silicon Valley? I mean, that was plain. But Chicago is really good at stuff like financial services. It's really good at logistics. It's really good at events. It's really good at hospital stuff and medical stuff. It's really good at consumer products. It's really good at B2B, behind the scenes, operational type businesses, light manufacturing businesses that they don't have anyplace else. And so if you think about that and you invest in that, all of a sudden, well, there's a network locally that can tap into that startup and go, yeah, we get it. We get it. We can become a customer, or we can introduce them to a customer or whatever. And so it gives the startup a little better chance of success. And odds are the angels in the group have that network. And so we can move it along faster. If you want to do the next Snapchat, Chicago's probably not the place to start it.
Why do you say that?
Just no DNA for that here. I mean, it's a business, first of all, that doesn't generate any revenue initially. So Chicago investors like to see revenue. It's a business that's it's a consumer business that's, it's on a phone. What is it? Chicago people like meat and potatoes businesses. They like stuff that they can see, touch, feel, that has a real solution to something. So Snapchat was solving, I guess you could say, picture chat or something. I don't know, but was it really a problem? I mean, I think investors here like to solve problems that are there, that are more tangible.
I think the problem was sexting initially. It was those nudie pics that had to disappear.
Yeah, well, every single thing that comes out if it's going to be successful, pornography people latch onto it early. So do money launderers. So does crime and stuff. So that's actually a good sign. So if, like, for instance, when we invested in Y charts, if a bunch of drug dealers were checking Y charts to see what their stock portfolio was doing, I'd see that as a good sign. That'd be really good for me. I'd say that's a plus. If a bunch of pornographers were using Y charts to gauge, stuff, that would be great for me, because they latch on to stuff really early. It happens that, usually it's in the visual arts, and I think pornographers were some of the first people on YouTube, right? And now there's YouPorn and Pornhub and name the site. I mean, YouTube killed the porn industry, if you think about it.
We have to keep it somewhat PG. I don't want to flag the explicit
I understand
on the podcast.
Yeah, I get it. No, but that's the way it is. And I think I'm not the only person to recognize that. I mean, if you talk to venture capitalists, they've said that. I mean, Fred Wilson has talked about that with Bitcoin. If drug dealers are using Bitcoin, they're the natural ones to use it. So that means they're solving a need. Okay, let's see if it can go from niche to movement to mainstream. I mean, Bitcoin's still a niche right now, but Andreessen's also made that observation.
Let's talk about West Loop Ventures a little bit.
Sure.
How is that process going? Getting that
It's
started?
really hard. Kenny and I are very experienced. We know what we want to do, but the hardest thing is raising the money. Chicagoans are very risk averse when it comes to venture. So we're going to have to raise the money outside of Chicago in a lot of cases. And Chicagoans like real estate and they like private equity. They don't like venture. There are fund of funds in Chicago that don't believe in the city, that are sending their money 100% to Silicon Valley. There are people I know that are managing family offices that don't believe in Chicago, that are sending 100% of their money to Silicon Valley. And, some of it is cover your own ass. So if you go to Silicon Valley and lose everything, you can say I was investing in the best tech ecosystem in the world, and you don't have any egg on your face. If you were investing in Chicago and lose everything, the first question is, why the hell didn't you go to Silicon Valley? So I get that a little bit. But at the same time, the people that make outsized returns do things that the herd doesn't do. And they are more contrarian investors, and they're a step ahead of everybody. And I think right now, Silicon Valley is great, but if you look at LA, or you look at New York, or you look at Austin, Texas, or Kansas City, or St. Louis, or Chicago, even Detroit has a small startup ecosystem. That's kind of where the puck is going. And people there are different types of entrepreneurs. They are well steeped in the industries that they're disrupting. They know more than the typical person. They know where the bodies are buried. And so they're building very different kinds of businesses.
How do you go about finding these investors?
I do it a lot of different investors to find in the fund, or
LPs.
Yeah, that's hard. You just network for them.
Okay. So is there anything you wish you knew when you got started with angel investing?
Yeah, I wish I knew that the holding period was really going to be longer than 5 to 7 years. I really thought it was going to be 3 to 5, because that's kind of what you read, but it's more like 10. So out of all my investments, they fail fast. So, you have a few failures. And I have failures like everybody. And then I had a couple of exits. They weren't big exits, but they were exits. And the rest of them are either on their first slug of capital, or they're raising next rounds of capital and they're building a business, but they're nowhere close to exit.
It's often said you don't know if you're good for like 10 years. Is that something you'd agree with?
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea about that. I think depending on the business, I can analyze it probably as good or better than a lot of people. If it's in fintech, certainly. But it's seed, you're really betting on the people. So you got to be a good analyzer of people, not just ideas. So I think and I can't talk about venture investing where you're doing, let's say, Series B investing and further out. but sort of that seed Series A investor, number one, they have to read a lot. They have to have a vision of the future. What's the future going to look like? And it's not about what can't happen. It's about what possibly could happen. And would it be cool if it could happen? And then could it be built and all that stuff? It's kind of science fiction crap, right? So I have a really good friend. He runs a flower company. And
is it Bloom Nation?
No. It's an industrial. They sell to like Home Depot and shit. And he, I was talking to him about driverless cars, and he's like, "That's never going to happen." And I said, "Of course it's going to happen." And he's like, "That will never ever happen." He said, "You are insane." And so you can't think like that. You kind of got to think of a world. What does the world look like with driverless cars? Okay, well, if driverless cars are everywhere and driverless trucks are everywhere and nobody's driving, do we need parking garages? Right? Okay, how do you convert that real estate? What kind of businesses are done with that? Do we need parking spots on the street? Probably or probably not. And if they're all electric Teslas, what does that look like? And so you kind of got to scheme out this stuff and just sort of brainstorm what the world looks like, and talk about what could be, not what is or what can't be. And then there are some ideas that you just go, I don't think so. And I always reserve judgment about those, like, well, maybe I don't see it because I'm not the target market. Maybe I'm not smart enough to see it. Maybe I just am not. Maybe the entrepreneur and I just can't. Maybe I'm just not reading them correctly to get their vision of the world. And so I'm making a mistake somehow there, and I have to open up some other part of my psyche to understand them. So I think you never say never, but there are ideas that come forward that seem to have a better chance of succeeding than other ideas based on the knowledge that you have about the world as it is, the knowledge of the world that could be, and then on the person, can they execute? And that's what it all comes down to. Can that person actually turn that idea into a business? And that's hard.
So at the seed level, you're investing in these people. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think, if you look at the people that I've invested in, and I can tick them off, the ideas were great, okay? But the people were greater. And, yesterday I was with Dan Ratner and Jason Kunesh at Public Good. Those guys are amazing guys. I'm politically 180 degrees different than them, right? So I'm a libertarian, conservative Republican. They're liberal Democrats, ran the Obama tech team. But I love hanging around those guys. They're really smart. They're really nice people, and they can get stuff done, and they know how to get stuff done. People at Kapow events, I met Mark and Dan, and they were a little bit past the idea stage. They had an operating thing. It was really early, but you could just sort of tell that they could get stuff done. Sue Kim, same thing. So on and on and on. Sam Rosen with Despass, that guy has just kept that company alive. He's scrappy, and I think he's latched on to something. Jay with Dabble, he came into that company. The company should be dead, but because of Jay, it's alive and doing well and growing. So great entrepreneurs can make a huge difference at early stage, and it extends up to the research Steve Kaplan's done on C-level executives and the stock market. So who has the most outsized impact on a publicly traded stock? It's the C-suite. They can have an outsized effect on the company, and it's been proven. So, it carries right through. And when VCs get involved, they can bet on ideas, right? Because they have teams of people they know can execute, that they can plug into that idea and bring the horse home. So the management team is everything.
So we had Caitlin Smith on last week.
Yeah.
What did you see in Simple Mills that made you invest?
That's an interesting investment. First of all, she's great, right? So I was, to be totally honest, I was dragged kicking and screaming into the Simple Mills deal. I am probably one of the worst consumer products investors in the history of mankind. I don't like doing them. I don't do them. I've only lost money in consumer products. So Bob Rosenberg and Mark Tebbe basically said to me, you have to invest in this deal. And I said, come on. And they said, you got to invest in this deal. And so, you watch her pitch, and she pitched really well. She won the New Venture Challenge. So I think that when you win the New Venture Challenge at the University of Chicago, that's validation that the idea is probably pretty good. She had distribution, but what was really interesting is she built Simple Mills to solve her own problem. So she was having trouble, and she said, what if I could do this? And she hacked it all together, right? Well, that says something about somebody, I think. They solved their own problems, and she built a nice little business that she thinks she could build a really big business off of. She has really good vision. The team is really good. And she was really, what was really cool about Caitlin and about a lot of the entrepreneurs that have let me invest in them, is she was open to a lot of stuff. So by that, I mean, coachability is probably an overused word, but if you have an opinion on something, or if you have an idea for something, they'll listen to it critically, process it, and tell you either why they're going to do it, what they're doing about it, or why it's a bad idea. And I have a lot of ideas. I have a lot of stuff up in my head, and I see a lot of stuff, and I pass it along to people, but and they don't have to act on it all the time. But the great entrepreneurs will say that's going to be next quarter. Yes, we see that. We saw that too. And then you have an exchange about it, and you kind of think about it. It's not a command and control thing where you say, hey, I really think you should be using Twitter bots for your company to find out data about customers or whatever, or to micro-target customers. And then you get all ticked off because the company says, no, we really don't want to allocate the resources to Twitter bots because, it might be a stupid strategy for us. And then the investor jumps up and down and screams and has a tantrum. I think that's the wrong thing. I think the other thing, though, in the tell with entrepreneurs is when you're negotiating the deal, how rigid are they? Are they flexible? And I mean, not acquiescing to every single point you have, but how flexible, and then how realistic are they? So we need to raise X amount of dollars, and we think this is why. And you say, no, I really think you should raise quite a bit more than that because this is my experience and this is what I'm seeing. And they go, well, no, we don't want to give away that much equity. And if you can come to an agreement somewhere in that negotiation, you find out a lot about them. And I've walked away from deals because you can't negotiate with the guy.
Do you make a point of testing their coachability before investing in them?
Oh, you always have to. So nobody writes it. If you'll hear about stories like I wrote a check in the first meeting after the meeting them for 15 minutes, right? That's so rare. Usually it's a relationship. So it's like dating. So you develop a relationship over 2, 3, 4, 5 months before you write a check. And frankly, it behooves the entrepreneur to do that too, because they need to interview the person investing in them just as much as the person investing interviews, right? Because you don't want bad investors in your deal. And bad investors can screw up a great deal. And a bad board member can be a total pain in the ass and just totally screw with your head. It's tough enough running a company, managing a company, building a company without investors breathing down your neck and being dicks. I think Brad Feld has written a lot about this. I think people change. Like my trading experience, what's really funny is I traded my own money and I watched traders melt down. I watched it. And when they'd have too many on or too big of a position or didn't get their way or whatever, or lost a lot of money. It's always never on the winning side, right? Those are first world problems. But they would go crazy and not be human. And I've seen people do that in the boardroom. They've got too much money in the deal, or too much of their reputation is on the line, and they start making decisions emotionally and not logically and without discipline, and that's what causes problems.
So changing directions a little bit.
Sure.
You're one of Chicago's probably most prolific bloggers. Do you have a set routine to get that stuff out?
I started blogging. So I started writing some articles in 2007, 8 for pajamasmedia.com. I always had to go through an editor. I never knew if they were going to get posted or not.
What was Pajamas Media?
It's an online site. It's kind of a conservative website, but at the time, because of my knowledge of the financial industry and seeing what was happening, I could write pretty coherently about it. I wrote a post about Hank Paulson bailing out his buddies, and that's exactly what he did. And I around when I started really blogging, I guess it was January of 2010, maybe. I don't know when. I could have to look when the first one was. But I just saw this stuff happening in the world. Maybe it was 2009. I don't know. I really didn't like the stimulus package. I thought it was a total waste of money when they passed it. Turns out Rick Santelli's a pretty good friend of mine, and he started the Tea Party movement off that. But it was a waste of money. So the interesting thing is the multiplier effect of government spending is zero or very close to zero. And, if you look at the math and you look at what they got for that, they got nothing for it. I was very against Obamacare. I was for the end goal of Obamacare, but very against having a government program to get to that goal. And so I wrote about that. And then all the things that were happening with Dodd-Frank, I wrote a lot about that. And because it was wrong. And I wasn't the only guy writing about it. So there's a guy, PhD economist who teaches at the University of Houston, runs a great blog, Craig Perrong, Streetwise Professor. And he said the same stuff. John Cochran, who's now with the Hoover Institution, was at the University of Chicago, was saying the same stuff. And so I wasn't alone. And it just was whatever I felt like doing, but I did it every day. And then I started reading like Brad Feld's blog and Fred Wilson, who has become a friend of mine. I started reading his blog, and he blogs every single day. And he takes days off where he'll just post a video or something. Sometimes I do that, but rarely. But now I just wake up in the morning and I blog about whatever I feel like blogging about that day. And over the course of time, it's transitioned from sort of that other stuff to startup stuff that I see, or it's because a blog is really it's about me and what I sort of feel. So people can have different opinions. It's fine. I don't get a lot of comments on my blog because a lot of financial people read it and they can't. So FINRA keeps them pretty much in the box.
An anonymous option?
I don't think so.
No?
I did a thing on social media at a conference for financial people, and the biggest problem they have, like tweeting things, being on Facebook, and putting things out there that are financially related to their job, is regulation from the federal government, and the fact that these regulators can come down on them. And I think with the Department of Labor ruling that happened this week, that'll even be worse, because now they've created this thing called a fiduciary responsibility, which of course they have a fiduciary responsibility, right? They always did before, but now it's in language. And so how they enforce that and interpret that is going to be scary to a lot of people.
I have some finance friends that have like anonymous Twitter, so
Yeah.
that's not their own.
Yeah.
They're right under.
Yeah. I mean, the government can't root out everybody, but if they do, you're in trouble.
Definitely.
So,
yeah. What's been the best advice you've received?
the best advice I've received on investing in startups or just in general?
You go either direction with it.
I think you gotta, I don't know. You gotta always be learning. You have to be patient. I'm a lot better than I was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. And I started doing yoga a couple years ago, which helps. But I think the most important thing that an investor can do is listen, learn a lot, and ask a lot of questions. And really try to put yourself in the entrepreneur's shoes and be very empathetic to what's going through their head. So, maybe the entrepreneur loses it one day and you got to say, well, did you have a fight with your wife? Or, all kinds of things can impact what's going on. And so you have to be very cognizant of it. More like Yoda, kind of, if you think about Yoda. And you got to be more like that and less like, some swashbuckling person that, is ego driven. And, I really do. For me, it's funny. Entrepreneurs let me into their deal. I don't get into their deal. Right. So I'm fortunate enough to be able to write the check to them. The other thing that I think Chicagoans miss out on, because not a lot of them invest in early stage stuff, is every time I write a check to a Chicago-based company or an Illinois-based company or whatever, Midwest, number one, I'm creating economic opportunity in the region. Number two, I'm helping make somebody's dream come true. I'm part of a syndicate that does that. Number three, I'm helping people solve problems to make everybody's life easier. And the last thing is I'm creating economic activity in the region that needs it, right? And so that's some of the things that go through your head as an investor. But it's a learning process. And right now, I'm not really looking for a lot of new investments. So I take a lot more time and I really pick and choose. I see some really good companies, but I'm pretty fully invested right now, so I got to wait for exits.
What's been your most recent investment and why did you say yes?
The last one I did was Catalytic. I talked to Sean Chow.
I'm not familiar with them. What did they do?
Sean was with Fieldglass, and I met him through a professor at the University of Illinois named Paul Magelli. And Sean was the chief operating officer. And he thought about doing some VC stuff. And one day we were talking and he said, I'm not a VC, I'm an entrepreneur. And I got an idea. And so he came back to me and said, I'd love to have you in my deal if you wanted to get in. And so we talked about it. And he's assembled a tremendous team. And we'll see. It's called, Catalytic is the name of the firm. And they're doing it out in the western suburbs. And we'll see. I mean, it's a bet, right?
What are they doing?
I can't say exactly what they're doing, but it's pretty cutting edge. It's fully mobile, and it solves a real problem and pain point out there for software as a service people. So it will be a software as a service type company. So he's got a revenue model and stuff like that.
All right. What advice would you give to someone that's maybe looking to get into venture capital?
If you want to get into venture capital, there's two ways. Win the lotto, have a pile of money from your family or make a pile of money. That's kind of all the same. But let's say you were a person like me. So I grew up, middle class. My dad was a teacher. I mean, he was a PhD in education, but still he was, a teacher. Um, and I had to earn it, right? Let's say you were a kid like me. I would go work for a startup. I would, if I didn't have a startup idea and I couldn't build something, I would go work for a startup. I think joiners are valued just as much as people with ideas. Amanda Lannert runs Jellyvision here in Chicago. She's a tremendous CEO. She didn't come up with the idea. She's a joiner, and she's great. And I think when she gets done with that, she may join another company and run it. If you look at Dick Costello, is probably the famous one. He was CEO of FeedBurner. He joined that company, and they exited, and then he became CEO of Twitter and grew it up and took it public, and now he's kind of not doing anything, and he's working for a venture firm. So I think venture firms right now don't like people from Wall Street. They don't like ex-consultants. They want operators that worked for a startup.
Okay, good advice. Do you have any favorite books?
I don't know. I have a lot. I read a lot of periodicals. I've read less books. I need to start reading more books. What was the last good one I've read? Because I'm on the board of the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, I wind up reading a lot of World War II books that I get. I read this one. It's called The Last Stand of the Tin Can Navy by Hornfisher. And he also wrote Neptune's Inferno, Battle of Guadalcanal. And the reason it stands out for me is my friend Phil Satre, who was CEO of Harrah's and on the board with me, recommended it because we were talking like, so if you were an 18-year-old kid in 1941 and you were going to join the military, right? So you got three branches: Army, you got Marines, and you got Navy. And in the Army, you could also do Army Air Force, right? So where would you have the best chance of living? Where do you think the best chance of living was?
Air Force.
No chance. No.
No?
If you read the stories,
1941.
yeah. If you read the stories of the 8th Air Force and those bombing missions and stuff,
Yeah.
most of them died.
Do I get another guess?
The
Navy.
No. I would have thought the Navy. But most of the submarine guys died. And if you read Hornfisher's books about the battle in the Pacific, horrific. So at Guadalcanal, I think, and I'm going to get my numbers wrong, I think 1,700 Marines lost their lives on the land battle, and about 5,900 Navy guys lost their lives in the sea battle. And these guys, this last stand of the Tin Can Navy, this admiral, the Japanese faked out the United States Navy, and this admiral turned his ships around knowing he was going to die. To confront this Japanese flotilla. And he basically said, we're turning around, we're going after them. And every crew member knew they were going to die, but they did it. And that was an amazing story. I think for startup people, if you wanted to read a World War II book, the book on the Doolittle Raiders is fascinating. So Jimmy Doolittle was, an Army Air Force guy, and we were bombed December 7th of 41, and he organized a volunteer force. Everybody volunteered, figured out how to fly B-25s off an aircraft carrier. They flew them off the aircraft carrier, bombed Japan, which was supposedly impenetrable, ditched out over China, and made their way back to the United States. So these guys volunteered for the mission, not knowing what they were going to do. They figured out how to do this off an aircraft carrier. Nobody had ever done it before. In the process of getting the planes on the aircraft carriers, the Navy mechanics screwed up the engines, so they had to, they had to fix them all before they took off. They were found I don't know how many miles by some Japanese radar or plane or something before they wanted to take off. So they had to take off too soon. And they had sketched it out on ground, but they really didn't know if it was going to work or not. And Doolittle was the first pilot to take his plane off the thing. And it's just a classic case of a startup. And you see that over and over again with different things in small military operations like that. I'm reading a good book that Jerry Colonna recommended, and I can't remember the name of it. I apologize, but it's kind of on Zen and sort of Buddhism and stuff like that. It's on your mental stuff. Another great book to understand the city of Chicago is called City of the Century. It's a story of Chicago from 1830 to 1900. My friend wrote it. And I said, that was a fascinating book, Professor Miller. And he said, what'd you learn? And I said, nothing's changed since 1830. And he said, you're right. So the culture of Chicago is embedded in that book. It's really interesting.
So I've been looking for like the best Buddhist book recently. Do you have a good book on Buddhism?
I don't. My wife does. I really don't. Andy Grove's book on management is really interesting. I mean, so Mike Gibbs has a great book. He's a professor at the University of Chicago called Personnel Economics in the Workplace. And it's on how to manage a workforce and hire and fire and stuff. That's it's boring, but it's interesting and it's real stuff. But I read mostly periodicals.
Then what are your favorite periodicals?
I think any of the bloggers, like AVC, I read every day. Feld's blog is great. Read a lot of articles that I see on, Wired and all over the place about stuff. I think what's interesting about the entrepreneurial community is you can take stuff from one edge of the universe. Let's say it's about oil wells or how these things work, and you might be able to apply it somewhere else. Management is I have a good friend from Texas. His name is Jeff Minch. He writes a great blog called The Musings of the Big Red Car. And Jeff's kind of a coach, right? He took a couple companies public. And he said, this generation didn't invent sex. Sex was going on a long time before this generation came around. And I think same thing with building a company. So Coase wrote a seminal paper in 1937 about the nature of the firm. And yeah, management styles, the way we phrase things are different. Do you manage, top down, bottom up? Do you have a flat hierarchy? All that's just the way you structure your company has to do with who your target market is, what your product is, and how you're selling it. But reading some of these older pieces sometimes allow you to see how the world's evolved and changed, and you can apply those things. So I always tell people, like, what's the best kind of startup company to start? One that solves a real problem, a real pain point. But if you can use Ronald Coase principles to solve that problem, you could create a bigger company than what you probably thought before, because his theory is just so magnetic and it underpins a lot of economic theory.
What's his theory?
Basically, as long as property rights are clearly assigned and there are no costs to bargain, whatever deal that you and I negotiate is the best deal for us, but it's also the best for society.
Okay.
I can't say it any plainer than that. It's a lot more complex than that, but that's it. It's kind of like Merton Miller saying he's got the theory on stock splits, where stock splits don't really help the stock. And somebody said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, if I have $1 in one pocket and 4 quarters in another pocket, do you care? Do you feel like you have more? And they go, well, how'd you come up with that conclusion? It seems so simplistic. And he goes, it is, but there's a lot of math that prove that out, right? And so I think, reading some of those actual core University of Chicago academic concepts, understanding them and then being able to put them into practice, they really work. And so you see firms that came out of the New Venture Challenge that do really good. So, Brian Johnson was in my class and did Braintree and did really well. Matt Maloney was in 06, right? Did really well. So over and over and over again, you see these New Venture Challenge companies that win, They came out of Chicago. These people understand the DNA of Chicago. They put it into practice, and they build great companies.
Brian Johnson's definitely like one of my idols. I'd love to have him on
Oh,
sometime.
yeah? He's a great guy.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
reach out to him at some point.
Yeah, I hate him only because he wouldn't let me invest. I tried to invest, and he didn't take any startup investment.
Oh wow.
He bootstrapped that son of a bitch.
Yeah.
He's a great entrepreneur. Yeah.
He's a fascinating guy too.
Yeah, he's a really great guy. He was a classmate, and he's just a really great guy.
So what's one thing that you think Chicago could do better?
I think the ingredients are here. We need more money. So it's like a college kid saying, please send money. We do need more money. And we need more money at a seed and Series A level, because that's what creates the big platform companies. You don't have, you don't fund companies at Series D and say, they're already well established and on their way. So we need a lot more at bats. We can't be as afraid of failure. I had an entrepreneur say, hey, if I fail, is it going to be a black mark on me the rest of the year? And I mean, rest of my career. And I said, not for me, but and if it is for other people in Chicago, we might as well not have a startup community. I think we need to get the chip off our shoulder and not think of ourselves as a second city. We're just a different ecosystem. I think the other thing we need to do is think a lot bigger and not do things so linearly. So, really disruptive innovation isn't drawing a line from A to B to C to D. It's A exists, and we're just going to blow that up. And so thinking about how to just totally blow something up, and not worrying about staying within the lines and not worrying about rules. Chicago is a very rules-based town. So it concerns me when the city council and the mayor want to put Airbnb under high scrutiny and taxes and this. It concerns me when they do it to Uber. It concerns me when they do it to hot dog stands. So I think we have to not be worried about the rules as they are and create our own. And there's some entrepreneurs doing that, and there's some that aren't. I think a lot of the focus I see in social media right now is about, women entrepreneurs or minority entrepreneurs. And for me, it's about all entrepreneurs, not just anybody. It's just, if you want to come to the table and work, we'll find a place for you. And I think New York has that attitude, and Silicon Valley has that attitude. But Chicago sometimes is, where are you from? Who sent you? Stuff like that, because that's ingrained in our culture. And I think we have to abandon that and just say, I don't care where you came from. I don't care who you are, what color you are, female, male, whatever. If you can do the job, let's go and let's collaborate. And that brings up another point. I think Chicagoans tend to want to own it all. So, and as a trader, I would never want to talk about my successes. If I was trading well, I wanted to keep it quiet because I didn't want anybody else to come in the pit and compete. I would always moan, oh, it's horrible. And you never wanted to share. And I think the funds in Chicago need to collaborate a lot more. And I think there's a lot of different sort of silos of things cropping up, and the more collaboration in between them and the more working together, the better it'll be. And I think the Valley Valley's the best in the world at that. I think New York is very good at that because they had an immigrant culture there, and that's the way the financial culture from Wall Street was. And it's bled over into their startup community. So I think we could do that a lot better.
And where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Points and Figures. My blog is Points and Figures. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, pretty much everywhere in social media. Some people called me the oldest man in social media for a while, but I'm not anymore, I don't think. And, you can get in touch with me there. I had 2 entrepreneurs from Austin, Texas when I was down there ping me on Twitter and said, hey, do you want to go shoot guns? And we want to pitch you on our business. And so we did. We went out and shot guns, and they pitched me on their business. And they got a really cool idea. It's not investable yet, but yeah, I'm all over the place. And I generally don't talk to people between 8:30 and 3 until we get this fund raised, and then I'll be full-time on that.
Okay. Sounds great. Thanks for coming on.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
Big thank you to Jeff for coming on. If you're an entrepreneur looking for advice or investment, it sounds like he'd be open to a day at the gun range. And I'm also told he could be bribed with good seats to a Cubs game. Definitely check out his blog for his musings on the Chicago tech scene at pointsandfigures.com. We touched on a lot of different people and things on the show. If you want to learn more about them, you can find links to them in the show notes at techinchicago.co. If you enjoyed this episode, please go to iTunes and review Tech in Chicago. Every review helps a lot. Support for Tech in Chicago comes from Geneva Denim. They're a Chicago-based jean company and makers of the world's most comfortable jeans. If you're like me and hate wearing pretty much anything other than sweatpants, you have to get a pair of Geneva Premium Active Denim. Check them out at genevadenim.com. See you next week.